Welcome back to the Ancient Path. Now I want to talk about God's omniscience. God's omniscience means that God knows everything. But the question is, what does it mean that God knows everything? Oftentimes people think that that means that the future is somehow a fixed reality. Many people think that God knows the future as this fixed entity in the same way that we know the past. We know that in July of 1776, America declared independence from England. We know the past in a very certain way because it's a fixed reality. Oftentimes people think that God knows the future in the same way. They think that God knows the future as a set reality. God knows everything, but how can the future be a fixed reality if we have free will? You can say, but God simply knows what we will choose. The question is, does that mean that we're fated to choose things? Something in us wants to believe that we have free will. Something in us wants to believe that we have the power to change the future. Something in us wants to believe that we have authority to, in some measure, make changes that will affect how the future goes. We don't want to believe that we are simply fated for a future that we have no say in. Let me say this, we feel this way because God has wired us to be co-creators. So again, God is omniscient. He does know the future. But the question is, how does He know the future? Christian philosopher Dr. Michael Peterson would argue that God knows everything that is logically possible to know. So it is very important to consider how God can logically know the future. And here I think we need to take a moment to consider the limited perspective of our position. We are clearly operating on the fringes of our rational abilities when we begin to talk about understanding what God knows and how He knows it. It is very important to take a humble posture here and not dogmatically act like we know more than we can actually know. When it comes to God's omniscience, His ability to know everything, even Scripture seems to offer different ways of understanding how God knows the future. That being said, faithful Christian philosophers and theologians come down on a couple different sides of the argument. There are those who believe that God is timeless. So God knows the future not because it's some fixed or fated reality, but because He is present to both the future and the current reality. Since time is a created reality, God stands outside of time. This is the classical view of timelessness, or the Boethian concept of divine foreknowledge. There are also those who believe that God is everlasting. God existed before He created time, and now He exists inside of time, the time that He created, and ultimately He will outlast time itself. There are compelling arguments for both God's timelessness and His everlasting nature. I think both can be argued from Scripture. Therefore, I think great humility and kindness towards those of opposite perspectives is really important. Having said all that, for the sake of this video, I will take the timeless approach to God's omniscience. God knows the future not because everything is fated or somehow set in stone. God knows the future because God stands outside of time. Dr. Peterson says time is creaturely. God created time. Therefore, before God created time, God existed. This means that God is present to us in 2020, and He's also present to 2025. Therefore, it's almost a misnomer to talk about divine foreknowledge. For God, it's not really foreknowledge because God stands outside of time and therefore is present to both now and the future. So for God, it's not foreknowledge, it's just knowledge. With all that in mind, the future is to some degree moldable based on the decisions we choose today. So, of course, God can logically know what He Himself will choose to do in the future. Since He is the most powerful being in the universe, God has great security about the course of human history. But can God logically know everything you will choose tomorrow, since one could argue that tomorrow is not even a reality yet? Are all of tomorrow's decisions logically knowable yet? Again, that is a topic of debate, and I think there are strong arguments for both sides. I think it's not debatable that there is certainly a logically knowable, probable reality of tomorrow based on present circumstances, people's current choices, etc. That being said, I think there is at least a knowable trajectory of tomorrow based on the reality of today. God, also being omnipresent everywhere at the same time and able to see every human heart and mind and the current decisions and the current circumstances behind every reality, means that God definitely knows what will transpire tomorrow if circumstances don't change. Therefore, God may see that I'm currently looking at a red car for sale on the internet. Seeing that my heart really wants to buy the car, He may also see that I have the money to buy the car. And He sees that I know that I have the money to buy the car. And He sees that the car is in good shape. And He sees that no one else currently wants to buy the car. God sees that I have the day off tomorrow. God sees a billion other variables, most of which I'm clueless about. And He sees that they are all lining up for me to buy that car tomorrow. But God doesn't just see the current variables. He also sees many of tomorrow's variables. The personality of the salesman at the car lot. How he and I would either work well together, or maybe he would be repulsive to me in terms of the way he goes about selling a car. But again, that doesn't mean that the future, me tomorrow at the car lot, is a fixed reality. God is present to that future, but it could change. Think about it like this. There's a movie I'm sure many of you have seen called Back to the Future. In it, Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox, is transported by a time machine from 1985 to 1955. When he arrives in 1955, he is met by the creator of the time machine, Dr. Emmett Brown. Dr. Brown warns Marty McFly, whatever you do, have nothing to do with your parents, because it could mess up the future. Of course, McFly comes into contact with both his mother and his father before they were even ever married. His contact with them starts to send the trajectory of their lives in different directions, and frankly, away from ever being married. At one point, Marty looks at a picture in his wallet that he had taken from 1985 to 1955. The picture is of himself, his brother, and his sister. The more his interactions with his parents begin to alter the course of their lives, the more he himself, his brother, and his sister start to disappear from the picture. Although there are certainly limitations to this example, what's important to see here is that God, standing outside of time, sees how current decisions are affecting and, frankly, molding the future. So we tend to see time as a linear progression. According to the timelessness or Boethian model, God is present to both now and how the present decisions are affecting the future. He's present to the future.